The rain came down in heavy sheets, hammering the cracked sidewalks of Cleveland, Ohio, like a drumroll that refused to quit. It was October 2025, and the city felt heavier than usual. Gas prices had spiked again, rents were creeping up, and the local news buzzed with stories of petty crime rising in the forgotten corners of the industrial district. At 2:13 a.m., Daniel Carter trudged through the downpour, his city sanitation uniform clinging to his broad shoulders, the reflective stripes catching faint glints from flickering streetlights. His boots sloshed through puddles, and his breath puffed out in cold bursts. He was 32, a single dad, and bone-tired after a double shift sweeping streets littered with fast food wrappers and broken dreams. All he wanted was to get home to his 6-year-old daughter, Ava, who was sleeping under the watchful eye of Mrs. Elena Torres, the neighbor who'd become family. Daniel adjusted the strap of his worn work bag, checking his phone for a text from Elena, *, Ava's fine, tucked in with her dinosaur blanket. Don't slip in this rain. IJ. He smiled faintly, then tucked the phone away, pulling his hood tighter. That's when he saw her, a figure huddled under the awning of a shuttered bodega, arms wrapped tight around herself, hair plastered to her face like wet ink. She was young, maybe mid-20s, her thin jacket no match for the storm. Something about the way she stood, shoulders hunched, eyes darting, made Daniel pause. This wasn't just someone caught in the rain. She looked like she was running from something. You shouldn't be out here alone, he called, his voice low but steady, cutting through the rain's relentless patter. This block's no place to be standing at 2 in the morning. The girl spun around, startled, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and defiance. Her hair, dark and soaked, stuck to her cheeks, and her lips trembled, though whether from cold or something else, Daniel couldn't tell. I don't need your pity, she snapped, clutching herself tighter, her voice sharp but unsteady. Daniel took a step closer, careful to keep his distance, his hands raised slightly to show he meant no harm. His uniform's neon stripes glowed faintly under the streetlight, marking him as just another city worker, not a threat, not pity, he said evenly. Just saying there's a warm place nearby. No knives, no strangers waiting to jump you. She hesitated, her gaze flickering to the dark end of the street, as if expecting someone to emerge from the shadows. Her fingers shook, not just from the cold, and Daniel noticed the way her eyes kept scanning, like a deer caught in headlights. What happened? He asked, softer now, his voice almost lost in the rain. She looked down at the pavement, water dripping from her chin. I got robbed, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Phone's dead. Bag's gone. Everything's gone. The last word cracked, and she pressed her lips together, fighting to keep control. Daniel let the silence sit for a moment, the rain filling the gap. His first instinct was to walk away. Home was 2 blocks away, where Ava was waiting, where his world was safe and small. He didn't need complications, not with rent due next week and a hospital bill from Ava's last ear infection still looming. But something about her pride mixed with fear, the way she stood tall despite shivering, stopped him. He'd seen that look before, in the mirror, years ago, when he'd lost his wife and had to rebuild a life for Ava alone. You want to call someone? He asked, shifting his weight. She shook her head, quick and firm. No, I don't want to talk to anyone. I just need... She trailed off, her voice catching. Somewhere safe. Just until morning. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck, rain trickling down his collar. Every rational part of him screamed to keep moving. He had Ava to protect, a job that barely paid the bills, and a life that didn't have room for strangers. But his gut, call it instinct, call it foolishness, told him to act. All right, he said, adjusting his bag. I live 2 blocks from here. It's not much, but it's warm. Couch is yours for the night. She looked at him, eyes narrowing, as if searching for a catch. Her knees buckled slightly, exhaustion winning over suspicion. "Okay," she whispered, so quiet he almost missed it. They walked in silence, Daniel keeping a respectful distance, his eyes scanning the street for trouble. Cleveland's west side wasn't the worst, but it wasn't safe either. Petty thefts had spiked since the latest factory layoffs, and the city's budget cuts meant fewer streetlights worked. When they reached his duplex, a squat brick building, with peeling paint, he unlocked the door with care, motioning her inside. The living room was dim, lit by a single lamp. A shelf held Ava's picture books, a small pink backpack sat by the door, and the faint smell of microwave popcorn lingered. "Shoes off there," Daniel said, pointing to a mat by the door. "Couch is yours. Blankets in the closet if you need it." She nodded, wiping rain from her face with her sleeve. Her eyes darted around, taking in the modest space clean, but lived in, with crayon drawings taped to the fridge and a patched throw pillow on the couch. Daniel moved to a small room at the back, where he kept his work gear and a locked drawer for his wallet and keys. It wasn't that he didn't trust her. It was just habit, born from years of scraping by in a city that didn't forgive mistakes. He returned with a clean towel, a faded Cleveland brown sweatshirt, and a blanket. "Bathrooms to the right," he said, handing her the bundle. "Showers there, if you want it. Water takes a minute to heat up." She took the items, her hands trembling slightly, and looked at him, confusion flickering in her eyes. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice low but direct. Daniel scratched his jaw, the stubble rough under his fingers. "Because you looked like you needed help," he said simply. "And I'd hoped someone would do the same for my daughter if she ever got stuck." The word daughter made her flinch, just for a second, but she said nothing. She disappeared into the bathroom, and Daniel moved quietly to the kitchen. He heated a mug of water in the microwave. Coffee was a luxury he'd cut months ago, and set it on the coffee table with a folded note. Asterisk house phones on the wall if you need to call someone. Extra blankets in the closet. Keep the door closed. Ava's a light sleeper. Asterisk, he checked on Ava, who was curled up in their shared bedroom, her dinosaur blanket tucked under her chin. Her soft breathing steadied him, a reminder of why he kept going. Back in the living room, the girl whose name he still didn't know emerged from the bathroom, drowning in his sweatshirt, her hair damp but no longer dripping. She saw the mug and the note, her fingers brushing the paper's edge. For a moment, her guarded expression softened, and she sank onto the couch, pulling the blanket over her. The rain outside slowed to a drizzle, and the house settled into a quiet hum. She didn't know who Daniel was, a sanitation worker with $127 in his bank account, a dad who'd learned to braid hair from YouTube tutorials, a man who hadn't trusted anyone new since his wife died 3 years ago. And he didn't know. A Sophie Bennett, a name she hadn't shared, a runaway carrying a secret heavier than the storm outside. In her coat pocket, wrapped in a sock, was a gold necklace with a sapphire pendant, worth more than Daniel's annual salary. She hadn't meant to bring it, but it was the only thing she'd grabbed when she fled her father's penthouse 5 days ago. For now, none of that mattered. She curled tighter under the blanket, the mug's warmth seeping into her hands. For the first time in days, she felt safe, not because of money or power, but because of a stranger's quiet kindness. Tomorrow, she'd figure out what came next. But tonight, she'd sleep. The morning light filtered through the thin curtains of Daniel Carter's duplex, casting soft shadows across the living room. The rain from the night before had left Cleveland damp and gray, but inside, the air held the faint warmth of brewing. Oatmeal and the hum of a cartoon playing low on an old TV. Sophie Bennett stirred on the couch, the borrowed Cleveland brown sweatshirt bunched around her shoulders. The blanket Daniel had left her tangled at her feet. For a moment she felt unmoored, The unfamiliarity of the small space, jarring after years in her father's polished penthouse. Then she heard a high-pitched giggle, bright and unguarded, coming from the floor nearby. Sophie sat up, blinking, against the soft light. Across the room, a girl with curly brown hair sat cross-legged on a faded rug, stacking plastic blocks into a wobbly tower. She couldn't have been more than 6, her pajamas printed with grinning dinosaurs. The girl looked up, her eyes wide and curious, a smile breaking across her face. "Hi, you're the rain lady who slept on our couch." Sophie's lips twitched. Her first real smile in days. "Rain lady, huh? I guess that's me. I'm Sophie. What's your name?" "I'm Ava," the girl said proudly, puffing out her chest. "Daddy said a nice lady stayed over, 'cause she was cold and all rained on. That's you, right?" Sophie chuckled, the sound surprising her. "Yeah, that's me. Nice to meet you, Ava." A voice called from the kitchen, warm but teasing. "Ava, breakfast duty. Come help me not burn the toast this time." Ava giggled, her curls bouncing as she scrambled to her feet and dashed toward the kitchen. Sophie stretched, her body stiff from the couch, and followed slowly, curiosity pulling her forward. In the kitchen, Daniel stood at the counter, cracking eggs into a chipped ceramic bowl with one hand while stirring something in a pan with the other. His work bag sat in the corner, still damp from the night before, a reminder of the life he led outside these walls. The kitchen was small, cluttered with mismatched dishes and a fridge covered in Ava's drawing stick figures with oversized smiles. Sophie leaned against the doorway, watching him move with quiet efficiency. "You cook?" she asked, her voice caught between surprise and amusement. Daniel glanced over, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. "Only if Ava's brave enough to eat it. You want in?" Sophie hesitated, her hands fidgeting with the hem of the sweatshirt. "I can try, but fair warning, I'm not exactly a chef or good at any of this." She gestured vaguely at the domestic scene, feeling out of place. Daniel passed her a whisk, his eyes crinkling. "Neither am I. That's why we burn a lot of toast around here." She laughed, a sound that felt foreign after days of fear and running. They moved around the cramped kitchen, Ava climbing onto a stool to butter bread while Sophie attempted to whisk eggs. Predictably, she fumbled, the spatula slipped, and the bowl tipped, splattering eggs across the counter. "Oh no, Sophie," gasped, reaching for a towel. Ava beat her to it, thrusting a wad of paper towels forward with a grin. "It's okay. Daddy spills stuff all the time." Daniel said nothing, just raised an eyebrow as he scooped the eggs back into the pan, his movements calm and practiced. Sophie's cheeks burned, but Ava's giggle and Daniel's quiet acceptance eased the sting. They sat down to a breakfast of slightly overcooked eggs, chewy bacon, and toast that was more charcoal than golden. Daniel ate every bite without complaint, nodding at Sophie. "Not bad for a first try." "You don't have to lie," she said, raising an eyebrow. "I'm not," he replied, his tone matter-of-fact. "It's edible." "That's a win." Ava poked at her plate, chewing carefully, then whispered to Sophie, "Daddy's eggs are better. But don't tell him I said that." Sophie bit back a laugh, her chest loosening for the first time in weeks. After breakfast, Daniel cleared the dishes while Ava dragged Sophie to the living room to show off her block tower. As Sophie helped stack a wobbly spire, Daniel leaned in the doorway, drying his hands on a towel. "You got plans for today?" he asked, his voice casual but probing. Sophie's fingers paused on a block. Plans? She hadn't thought beyond surviving the night. Her wallet was empty, her phone dead, and her past was a door she'd slammed shut. "Not really," she admitted. "I need to figure things out, but I don't have much to work with." Daniel nodded like he'd expected that. "There's a laundromat a few blocks over. Owner's a friend, Sam. He might need an extra hand. Cash under the table. No questions asked." He hesitated, then added, "If you're sticking around, that is." Sophie looked at him, searching for judgment but finding none. "I don't know how long I'm staying," she said carefully, "but I could use the work." He gave a short nod. "I'll walk you over after I drop Ava at school." An hour later, Sophie followed Daniel down a street lined with faded storefronts, the air sharp with the smell of wet asphalt and diesel. Cleveland in 2025 was a city of contrasts. Gleaming downtown towers loomed in the distance, built on tech money and real estate booms, while neighborhoods like this one struggled with boarded-up shops and rising rents. Daniel pointed out the laundromat, a squat building with a flickering neon sign, Sam's Wash and Fold. Inside, the air was thick with the hum of machines and the scent of detergent. Sam, a wiry man in his 50s with a graying beard, barely looked up from the counter. "You Daniel's friend?" he asked, eyeing Sophie's borrowed sweatshirt. "Yeah," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Sophie." Sam tossed her an apron. "Start now. Fold towels, sort loads. $5 an hour, cash. Don't mess up." It wasn't a question, and Sophie didn't argue. She needed this something to keep her moving, to keep her hidden. The work was grueling. By noon, her back ached from hauling baskets, her hands stung from cheap soap, and a customer had already snapped at her for mixing whites with colors. She fumbled with the industrial machines, their clanking rhythms foreign to her. In her old life, laundry was handled by staff, and her biggest worry was which gala to attend. Now, she was sweating in a stuffy room, folding strangers' clothes for less than minimum wage. She glanced at the clock, only 3 hours in, with 5 more to go. Back at Daniel's that evening, Sophie collapsed onto the couch, wincing as she peeled off her sneakers. Blisters bloomed on her heels, raw and stinging. Daniel, just back from his shift, noticed but didn't comment. Instead, he handed her a glass of water and went to check on Ava, who was coloring in the kitchen. Sophie stared at the ceiling, the weight of the day pressing down. She'd almost walked away from the laundromat, tempted to slip back to a shelter or catch a bus out of town. But something, maybe Ava's giggle, maybe Daniel's quiet offer of a job, kept her here. The next morning, Sophie woke to find a pair of clean white sneakers by the door. No tag, no note, but clearly not hers. Inside one was a folded piece of paper. Asterisk. Thought your feet could use a break. If you're leaving, at least walk without pain. Asterisk. Her throat tightened. She slipped them on, the fit perfect, and felt a pang she couldn't name. When Daniel returned from dropping Ava at school, Sophie was in the kitchen, attempting toast. "You didn't leave," he said. Not a question. "I almost did," she admitted, flipping a slice that was already too dark. "Your guilt-trip shoes worked." He smirked, leaning against the counter. "Not guilt, just giving you a choice." Later that week, Sophie complained after folding an endless pile of towels at the laundromat. "I've never been this tired," she muttered, rubbing her neck. "I thought yoga was hard." Daniel looked up from sorting Ava's school clothes. "You're earning something real now." She gave him a tired look. "You mean blisters?" "Freedom," he said simply. "Works. Yours. No one can take that." Sophie didn't reply, but his words lingered. She thought of her father's world, money, control, expectations, and the necklace still hidden in her bag. She wasn't ready to tell Daniel who she was, not yet. But as she watched him braid Ava's hair before bed, humming a lullaby off-key, she felt something shift. This wasn't her world, but it was starting to feel like somewhere she could belong. The air in Sam's Wash and Fold was thick with the hum of industrial dryers and the sharp tang of detergent, a relentless rhythm that Sophie Bennett had come to know too well over the past week. It was mid-afternoon in Cleveland, Ohio, October 2025, and the laundromat was a blur of motion customers lugging baskets, machines rattling, and Sophie's hands moving mechanically as she folded a pile of towels. Her back ached, her fingers were red from soap, and a dull headache pulsed from another customer's complaint about a shrunken sweater. She'd never worked this hard in her life, not in the polished world of her father's penthouse, where effort meant choosing the right dress for a gala. Yet, despite the exhaustion, there was a strange satisfaction in the stack of neatly folded towels before her, something she'd done with her own hands. She glanced at the clock. 3:47 p.m., 2 more hours until she could limp back to Daniel Carter's duplex, where Ava would likely be waiting with a new block tower or a story about school. The thought brought a faint smile, but it faded as her fingers brushed against something hard in the pocket of her borrowed apron. Her heart stopped. She reached in, pulling out a thin gold chain, its sapphire pendant glinting like a shard of blue flame under the fluorescent lights. The necklace her mother's, the one thing she'd grabbed when she fled her father's control 5 days ago. She'd hidden it in an old sock in her duffel bag, or so she thought. How had it ended up here, tangled in the laundry? Before she could shove it back into her pocket, Daniel walked past, carrying a basket of linens from a nearby hotel contract. He stopped, his eyes landing on the necklace. For a moment, neither spoke. The hum of the machine seemed to grow louder, filling the silence. "That," Daniel said quietly, his voice steady but edged with something new, "isn't something a broke student carries around." Sophie's breath caught. She clutched the necklace, her mind racing for an excuse. "I forgot it was in there," she mumbled, stuffing it into her back pocket, her cheeks burning. "It's just something I kept." Daniel set the basket down, his gaze fixed on her. He wasn't angry, not yet, but the warmth she'd grown used to in his eyes was clouded with doubt. "Who are you, Sophie?" he asked, his voice low, almost drowned out by the clank of a dryer. "Really?" She opened her mouth, then closed it, her hands trembling. The truth was a weight she wasn't ready to share, not the penthouse in Chicago, not her father's empire, not the engagement she'd run from. "I'm just me," she said finally, her voice barely audible. Someone trying to start over. Daniel's jaw tightened, and he stepped back, his expression unreadable. Starting over's one thing, hiding's another. The words stung, but before she could respond, the bell above the laundromat door jingled sharply. A man in a leather jacket and a baseball cap stepped inside, his smartphone raised, eyes locked on Sophie. "There she is," he muttered, his voice smug as he snapped a photo. The flash caught her off guard, and she froze, her pulse hammering. "Hey!" Daniel stepped forward, his broad frame blocking the man's view. "What do you think you're doing?" "Relax, man," the guy said, taking another picture. "Just doing my job. Sophie Bennett, right? Your daddy's offering 6 figures to know where you're hiding. Been missing 5 days, sweetheart." Sophie's stomach dropped. The laundromat seemed to shrink, the walls closing in. She backed toward the counter, her hands fumbling for anything to anchor her. The man's phone clicked again, and she saw her face on his screen, grainy but unmistakable. "Get out," Daniel said, his voice low and dangerous, stepping closer to the man. The photographer smirked, undeterred. "Big reward, buddy. You could use it, judging by this place." He gestured at the peeling paint and overflowing baskets, his words cutting deeper than he knew. Daniel moved faster than Sophie expected, grabbing the man's arm and twisting it just enough to make him wince. "I said get out." The phone clattered to the floor, and Sam, alerted by the commotion, appeared from the back. "What's going on?" Sam barked, his eyes darting between Daniel, Sophie, and the stranger. "This guy's harassing her," Daniel said, not letting go. "He's leaving." The man yanked his arm free, scooping up his phone. "Fine. I got what I needed." He shot Sophie a last look. "You can't hide forever, princess." He slipped out the door, the bell jingling mockingly behind him. Sophie's knees buckled, and she gripped the counter, her breath shallow. Daniel turned to her, his face a mix of anger and concern. "You okay?" She nodded, though it was a lie. Her mind raced. How had they found her? She'd been careful, hadn't used her phone, hadn't contacted anyone. But she knew her father, Edward Langley, a Chicago real estate magnate whose name opened doors and closed futures. He'd hired people to track her, and now they were here, in this rundown laundromat in Cleveland. "We need to go," Daniel said, his voice clipped. He grabbed her arm gently but firmly, pulling her toward the back exit. "Sam, cover for us." Sam nodded, already distracted by a customer's complaint. Sophie stumbled after Daniel, her heart pounding as they burst into the alley behind the laundromat. The air was cool, smelling of damp concrete and garbage, but it felt like freedom compared to the claustrophobic hum inside. Daniel led her too. His old pickup truck parked a block away and opened the passenger door. "Get in." "What about Ava?" Sophie asked, her voice shaking as she climbed in. "She's at school," Daniel said, starting the engine. "I'll pick her up after. I get you somewhere safe." They drove in silence, the city blurring past boarded-up storefronts, billboards advertising crypto scams, and the distant glow of downtown's new tech towers. Sophie stared out the window, clutching the necklace in her pocket. She owed Daniel the truth, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she said, "I didn't mean to drag you into this." "You didn't," he said, his eyes on the road. "But you're in it now, and so am I." They pulled up to Mrs. Elena Torres' house, a tidy duplex next to Daniel's. Elena, a stout woman in her 60s with a sharp gaze and a warm smile, opened the door before Daniel could knock. "Mio, what's wrong?" she asked, glancing at Sophie's pale face. "Trouble," Daniel said simply. "Can you keep Ava tonight?" "Of course," Elena said, waving them inside. "She's always welcome." Daniel leaned down to Sophie. "Stay here. I'll get Ava and be back." Sophie nodded, her throat tight. She watched him drive off, the truck's taillights fading into the gray afternoon. Inside, Elena handed her a mug of chamomile tea, her eyes kind but probing. "You're running from something big, aren't you?" Sophie's fingers tightened around the mug, something like that. Elena didn't push, just pointed to a couch. "Rest. You're safe here." But Sophie didn't feel safe. She pulled out her dead phone, staring at the blank screen. Somewhere, on Twitter or TikTok, her face was probably spreading a missing heiress story, complete with hashtags and speculation. Hashtag runaway princess, they'd call her, turning her life into clickbait. She'd seen it before, when a friend's scandal went viral, dissected by strangers online. Her father's money ensured he could control the narrative, but not her. Not anymore. When Daniel returned with Ava, the girl ran to Sophie, hugging her legs. "You're back," Ava chirped, oblivious to the tension. "Want to build a castle?" Sophie forced a smile, kneeling to meet Ava's eyes. "Maybe later, sunshine." Daniel watched him, his expression unreadable. "We need to talk," he said quietly, once Ava was distracted with crayons. He led Sophie to the kitchen, closing the door. "That guy knew your name, your real name, and he mentioned a reward." "What's going on, Sophie?" She swallowed, her hands twisting together. "I told you I'm starting over." "That's true. But I left a life I couldn't live anymore. My father, he's powerful, and he wants me back. I ran because I had to." Daniel's eyes searched hers. "Ran from what?" "From being told who to be," she said, her voice breaking. "Who?" "To love, where to go, what to become." I couldn't breathe. He was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working. "You lied to me." "I didn't lie," she said quickly. "I just left things out." "That's the same thing," he said, his voice low but sharp. "I let you into my home, near my daughter. I trusted you." The words hit like a punch. Sophie's eyes stung, but she held his gaze. "I'm sorry. I didn't want to hurt you or Ava. I just needed a place to hide." Daniel ran a hand through his hair. Frustration etched into his face. "Hide from what? A rich dad? A bad breakup? Help me understand, Sophie, because I'm risking a lot here." Before she could answer, Elena knocked softly. "Daniel, you're—" "Phone's buzzing. Work." He cursed under his breath, grabbing his phone from the counter. Sophie caught a glimpse of the screen, a text from his supervisor, warning about rumors at the sanitation department. Someone had seen the photographer, heard the commotion. In a city like Cleveland, where jobs were scarce and gossip spread fast, even a hint of trouble could cost Daniel his livelihood. "I have to handle this," he said, pocketing the phone. "Stay with Elena. We're not done talking." Sophie nodded, her chest tight with guilt. As Daniel stepped out, she sank onto the couch, Ava's crayons scattered around her. The necklace felt heavy in her pocket, a reminder of the life she'd fled and the one she was starting to want. The late afternoon sky over Cleveland hung heavy with clouds, the kind that promised more rain but held back, as if waiting for something to break. Sophie Bennett sat on the edge of Mrs. Elena Torres' couch, her hands clasped tightly. The sapphire necklace a cold weight in her pocket. The hum of Ava Carter's crayons scratching across paper filled the small living room, a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside Sophie. It had been hours since the photographer's intrusion at the laundromat, hours since Daniel's sharp words. Hiding's different from starting over, had cut deeper than she'd expected. Now, at Elena's duplex, a block from Daniel's, Sophie felt the walls of her carefully constructed escape closing in. Ava looked up from her drawing, a lopsided castle with a smiling stick-figure princess. "Sophie, is this you?" she asked, holding up the paper, her eyes bright with innocence. Sophie forced a smile, her throat tight. "Maybe, sunshine, but I don't have a crown." "You don't need one," Ava said, matter of fact, returning to her crayons. Sophie's chest ached. This little girl, with her dinosaur pajamas and boundless trust, had no idea how much she'd come to mean in just a week. Nor did she know the chaos Sophie's presence had brought. The front door creaked open, and Daniel stepped inside, his work boots heavy on the hardwood. His face was drawn, the lines around his eyes deeper than usual. He'd just come from a tense call with his supervisor at the sanitation department, who'd heard whispers about trouble at the laundromat. In Cleveland's tight job market of 2025, where factory closures and gig economy apps left workers scrambling, rumors could cost you everything. Daniel's gaze met Sophie's, and she saw the weight of it trust strained, but not broken. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low to keep Ava from hearing. He nodded toward Elena's kitchen, where the older woman was stirring a pot of soup. Pretending not to listen, Sophie followed, her steps heavy. The kitchen smelled of onions and cumin, a warmth that clashed with the cold knot in her stomach. Daniel leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "That guy at the laundromat, he knew your name, Sophie, your real name. And now my boss is asking questions. I need the truth. All of it." Sophie's fingers curled around the necklace in her pocket, her lifeline to a past she'd tried to bury. "I told you I ran from my father," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's Edward Langley, a real estate tycoon in Chicago, worth billions. He controls everything, my life, my choices, who I'm supposed to marry. I left because I couldn't be his puppet anymore." Daniel's jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. She pushed on, the words spilling out. "He wanted me to marry some hedge fund guy to seal a business deal. I said no, and he made it clear I didn't have a choice. So I took off. 5 days ago. No plan, just gone." He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. And the reward? The guy with the camera? My father's way of dragging me back, she said, her voice bitter. He's got money, Daniel. Enough to hire people, to make sure I'm found. That necklace, she pulled it out, the sapphire catching the light. It's my mother's. The only thing I kept. I didn't mean for it to end up in the laundry. I didn't mean for any of this. Daniel stared at the necklace, then at her. You should have told me. I let you into my home, near Ava. I deserved to know what I was dealing with. I know, she whispered, tears stinging her eyes. I'm sorry. I thought I could just disappear. Be someone new. Before Daniel could respond, a sharp knock rattled the front door. Elena's head snapped up, her spoon pausing mid-stir. Stay here, she said, moving toward the living room. But Sophie's heart sank. She knew that knock, the kind that carried authority, not curiosity. Elena opened the door, and there he was. Edward Langley, tall and imposing, his silver hair neatly combed, his tailored suit out of place in the modest duplex. Behind him stood two men in dark suits, their expressions blank but alert. Ava looked up from her drawing, confused, as Elena tried to block the doorway. Can I help you? Elena asked, her voice firm. I'm here for my daughter, Edward. Sighed, his tone cold and commanding, his eyes locking onto Sophie as she stepped into the living room. Sophie, get in the car. The air seemed to thicken, the room shrinking under his presence. Sophie froze, her hand still clutching the necklace. Daniel moved to her side, his body a quiet shield. You her father? He asked, his voice steady, despite the tension. I am Edward Langley, the man said, his gaze sweeping the room with thinly veiled disgust. And you're the man hiding my daughter. I'm the man who gave her a couch when she had nowhere else. Daniel shot back, his tone hard but controlled. She's not a kid. She made her choice. Edward's eyes narrowed, his voice dripping with condescension. This place, this life, is beneath her. You think she belongs here, in this hovel, with you scraping by on a janitor's wage? Daniel's hands clenched, but he didn't flinch. I'm not keeping her here. She's free to go. But I'm not handing her over like she's property. Sophie's heart pounded, guilt and defiance warring inside her. She stepped forward, her voice trembling but clear. Dad, stop. This isn't about him. It's about me. Edward's gaze turned to her, sharp and unyielding. You've made your point, Sophie. You ran. You played your little rebellion. Now come home. This is home, she whispered, the words surprising even herself. She glanced at Ava, who was watching wide-eyed, clutching her crayons. Not the house, not the city, the people. They're more family than you ever gave me. Edward's lips tightened, a flash of something hurt, anger crossing his face before he masked it. You're throwing away everything. A future, security, our name. For what? This? He gestured at the room, at Daniel's worn boots, at Ava's scattered toys. Sophie's hand shook, but her voice grew steadier. I didn't throw it away. I walked away. There's a difference. The room fell silent, the only sound Ava's soft breathing and the distant hum of Cleveland's traffic. Edward gestured to his men. We're done here. Get in the car, Sophie. She looked at Daniel, his face a mix of resolve and quiet pain. She wanted to stay, to fight, but the weight of her father's world, his money, his influence, the life she'd fled was crushing her. If she stayed, she'd bring more trouble to Daniel, to Ava. The photographer was just the start. Her father could ruin Daniel's job, his life, with a single phone call. I think I have to go, she said softly, her eyes locked on Daniel's. Not because I want to, but because I have to. You don't, Daniel said, his voice low but firm. No one's forcing you. Yes, they are, she replied, her voice breaking. just not with words. The weight of her choice hung between them, heavy as the clouds outside. Edward said nothing, his silence a victory. One of his men opened the door, and Sophie stepped toward it, her legs unsteady. She paused at the threshold, turning back too. "Daniel, I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. He didn't respond, his jaw tight, his hands shoved into his pockets. Ava ran to Sophie, hugging her legs. "You're coming back, right?" she asked, her voice small. Sophie knelt, forcing a smile. "I'll try, sunshine." She kissed Ava's forehead, then stood, avoiding Daniel's gaze. The door closed behind her, the sound sharp and final, like a book slamming shut. Outside, the black SUV gleamed under the streetlights, its engine idling. Edward slid into the back seat without a word, and Sophie followed, her heart heavy. As the car pulled away, she glanced back, seeing Daniel on Elena's porch, his silhouette framed against the dim light. The city blurred past pawn shops, vape stores, billboards promising quick cash loans, and Sophie felt the life she'd glimpsed with Daniel and Ava slipping away. Back at the duplex, Daniel stood frozen, the air too quiet without Sophie's presence. Elena placed a hand on his shoulder. "She'll figure it out, Mio," she said softly. "Give her time." He nodded, but his chest felt hollow. He'd let her in, trusted her, and now she was gone, taking a piece of his world with her. Ava tugged at his hand. "Is Sophie okay, Daddy?" "She will be," he said, forcing a smile. But as he tucked Ava into bed that night, the house felt emptier, the future less certain. Outside, the clouds finally broke, and the rain began again. The days after Sophie Bennett's departure felt like a slow bleed for Daniel Carter. Cleveland's streets, slick with late October rain in 2025, mirrored the dull ache in his chest. He went through the motions clocking into his sanitation. Shift, sweeping litter under flickering streetlights, packing Ava's lunch with her favorite peanut butter sandwich. But the duplex felt hollow without Sophie's quiet presence. Ava noticed it too. Her usual chatter about school or dinosaurs had faded, replaced by a quiet that unnerved Daniel. She'd stopped humming while coloring, and at night she insisted on sleeping with a lamp on, as if the darkness held answers. Neither of them could face. On the fourth day, Ava woke with a cough, sharp and persistent, her small frame shivering under her dinosaur blanket. Daniel pressed a hand to her forehead, his heart sinking at the heat radiating from her skin. "Just a cold, kiddo," he said, forcing a smile as he bundled her up for school. But by evening, the cough had worsened, her cheeks flushed with fever. He gave her medicine from a half-empty bottle, leftovers from a winter flu, and tucked her in early. By midnight, Ava was shaking, her breath shallow, her eyes glassy with chills that no blanket could soothe. Daniel's hands trembled as he carried her to his pickup truck, the cold biting through his thin jacket. Ava curled against him, small and fragile, her coughs echoing in the quiet cab. The hospital was a 10-minute drive, but every red light felt like an eternity. Cleveland's emergency room was a harsh glare of fluorescent lights, the air thick with disinfectant and tension. Nurses moved briskly, their voices clipped as they processed a stream of patients' car accident victims, overdose cases, families like Daniel's caught in the city's grind. He paced the waiting area, Ava in his arms, her fever burning through his shirt. A nurse finally called them, taking Ava to a treatment bay. Daniel stood by her side, brushing damp curls from her face as a doctor checked her vitals. "Pneumonia," the doctor said, his tone clinical but not unkind. "Viral, likely, but we need tests to confirm. She needs to stay for observation, maybe a few days." Daniel nodded, his throat tight. "Whatever she needs, just make her better." The doctor scribbled notes, then stepped away, and a woman from billing approached, her clipboard clutched like a shield. "Mr. Carter, We need a deposit to admit her. $6,000 upfront. Hospital policy. Daniel's stomach dropped. He pulled out his wallet, knowing it held $132 and a maxed-out debit card. Rent was due in a week, and his next paycheck wouldn't clear until Friday. "Can I pay part now?" he asked, his voice low. "I'll cover the rest soon, I swear." The woman hesitated, her eyes softening but firm. "I'm sorry, but policy requires." "Please," Daniel cut in, his voice cracking. "She's 6 years old." He was still pleading when a voice broke through the sterile hum of the hallway. "I've got it." Daniel turned, his breath catching. Sophie stood there, her coat damp from the rain, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. She stepped past him without pause, handing the receptionist a sleek black credit card. "Put everything under my name," she said, her voice steady. "Room fees, medicine, tests, all of it." The nurse glanced at Daniel, then at Sophie. "Your relation to the patient?" Sophie met Daniel's eyes, her gaze unwavering. "Family," she said simply. Daniel stood frozen as the nurse processed the payment, the beep of the card reader impossibly loud. Ava was wheeled to a private room, her small form dwarfed by the hospital bed. An hour later, the doctor returned with test results. Treatable, but she'd need 4 antibiotics and monitoring. Daniel sat by Ava's side, his elbows on his knees, head in his hands. Sophie lingered in the doorway, her presence both a comfort and a question. "You didn't have to do that," Daniel said finally, his voice low, not looking up. "I know," Sophie replied, stepping inside and sitting in the chair beside him. "But I wanted to." He exhaled, his hands clenching. "You shouldn't have been pulled into this." "You didn't pull me in," she said softly, her eyes on Ava's sleeping form, a slight frown creasing the girl's fevered face. "I came back." Daniel looked at her then, his eyes searching hers. "How'd you even know?" Sophie hesitated, pulling her phone from her pocket. A new one, not the dead one she'd carried a week ago. Mrs. Torres posted in a community group online, asking for help. A fundraiser for Ava's treatment. "I saw it this morning, after..." She trailed off, her fingers tightening around the phone. "After I told my father I was done." Daniel's brow furrowed. "Done?" She nodded, her voice steady but heavy. "I went back to Chicago, to his penthouse. I thought I could reason with him, make him see I'm not his to control. But he didn't listen. He never does. So I walked out, for good." Daniel was quiet, the beeping of Ava's monitor filling the space. "You don't owe me anything," he said finally, his voice thick. "But thank you for Ava." Sophie leaned back, staring at the ceiling. "You told me once everyone deserves to walk without pain. That goes for hearts, too." They sat in silence, the hospital's hum a backdrop to their unspoken understanding. For the first time in days, Daniel let himself breathe, not just because Ava was safe, but because Sophie was here. The penthouse was a fortress of glass and steel, its floor-to-ceiling windows framing Chicago's glittering skyline. Sophie stood in the hallway, her sneakers silent on the marble floor, her hands clenched. Edward Langley sat at a long glass table, a tablet open to stock charts, his face unreadable. He didn't look up as she entered. "I figured you'd come to your senses," he said coolly, swiping the screen. "Rebellion's over?" "I didn't come back," Sophie said, her voice firm. "I came to talk." Edward set the tablet down, his movements deliberate. "You're denying reality, Sophie. Running off to play house with a man who works 3 jobs to keep the lights on? You had a future security, a name. You threw it away." "I didn't throw it away," she said, stepping closer. "I walked away. There's a difference." He rose, his eyes narrowing. "For a cleaner? A shack in Cleveland?" "He's not a cleaner," Sophie said, her voice rising. "He's a father who shows up for his daughter every day." He taught. Me more about strength in a week than you did in 24 years. Edward's lips tightened. You're choosing him over me? I'm choosing my life, she said, her voice steady now. And yes, the man who lives by his hands and his heart. He turned to the window, his shoulders stiff. This isn't a fairy tale. Love doesn't pay bills. It doesn't, Sophie agreed. But it keeps people warm. Edward poured himself a drink, his hands steady but his eyes betraying a flicker of vulnerability. I never meant to be the villain, he said, almost to himself. I know, Sophie replied. You just forgot how to be a person. He looked at her then, his gaze raw. Tell him he's lucky. No, she said softly. I'm the lucky one. She turned and walked out, the city's lights blurring through the rain-streaked windows. She didn't look back. Back in Cleveland, Daniel sat by Ava's bed, watching her chest rise and fall. Sophie returned from the hospital cafeteria, a cup of weak coffee in her hand. She's gonna be okay, she said, more to herself than to him. Daniel nodded, his voice low. Because of you. They sat together, the hospital's rhythm steady around them. Sophie's choice was made not just to return, but to stay, to build something real. The road ahead was uncertain, but for now, they were here, together, and that was enough. The first rays of sunrise slipped through the blinds of Daniel Carter's duplex, painting the kitchen in soft gold. It was a crisp Saturday morning in December 2025, and Cleveland buzzed with the quiet energy of a city waking up. The smell of pancake batter and fresh coffee filled the air, a small luxury Daniel had splurged on after a rare overtime check. He stood at the stove, shaping batter into lopsided dinosaurs, Ava's favorite, his movements steady but lighter than they'd been in weeks. The emptiness that had settled after Sophie Bennett's departure had begun to lift, replaced by something new, something like hope. A knock at the door broke his focus. Wiping his hands on a dish towel, he expected Mrs. Elena Torres, who often dropped off tamales on weekends, or maybe the mailman with another bill. Instead, he opened the door to find Sophie standing on the porch, her hair in a messy bun, her jacket dusted with morning dew. In her hands was a brown paper bag, the edges crinkled from her grip. For Ava, she said softly, her voice steady but warm. Blueberry muffins. The real kind, no fake stuff. Daniel froze, his hand still on the doorknob. Her presence felt like a chord struck after silence unexpected, resonant. Sophie, he said, his voice rough. You're back. I'm not here to stay the night, she said quickly, her eyes searching his. I'm here to stay, if you'll have me. He studied her face, looking for doubt, but found only resolve. Her eyes, once shadowed with fear, now held a quiet strength. We're not rich, he said, the words blunt but honest. This place, it's small, it's messy, it's enough, Sophie cut in, stepping closer. I've had everything, Daniel. Money, trips, fancy things. But I never had a kitchen with dinosaur pancakes. I never had a home that felt like it loved me back. Before he could respond, a small voice piped up from behind. Sophie! Ava ran into the room, rubbing sleep from her eyes, her curls bouncing. Sophie knelt, catching the girl in a hug as Ava's arms wrapped tight around her neck. Hey, sunshine, Sophie said, her voice thick. I brought muffins. Are you staying forever? Ava asked, her eyes wide with hope. Sophie looked up at Daniel, who gave a slight nod, his throat tight. She smiled, tears glinting in her eyes. Yeah, kiddo. Forever sounds good. 2 months later, the park near Daniel's duplex was alive with the hum of a Cleveland weekend families pushing strollers. Dogs chasing frisbees, the air sharp with the scent of grilled food and fresh snow. Daniel's old pickup truck, once a workhorse for late-night laundry runs, had been transformed. Its rusted bed now held a makeshift counter, a small grill, and a chalkboard sign that read Carter's Corner. Breakfast wraps, muffins, coffee. Sophie's idea, born one evening over Ava's coloring books, had taken root. She'd seen food trucks thriving downtown, where tech workers and locals alike lined up for artisan tacos and craft coffee, and thought, asterisk, why not us? Asterisk, it wasn't. Much, a side hustle to supplement Daniel's sanitation job and Sophie's laundromat shifts, but it was theirs. Sophie worked the grill, flipping pancakes with a precision she'd learned through trial and error, her apron dusted with flour. Daniel took orders, his easy smile drawing regulars who liked his no-nonsense charm. Ava, perched on a stool, handed out napkins and dinosaur stickers, her grin brighter than the winter sun. They didn't make a fortune, $200 on a good day, barely enough to cover supplies, but they made something else, a life. Sophie caught Daniel watching her as she slid a pancake onto a plate. Her movement sure now, nothing like the egg-spilling chaos of her first week in his kitchen. He mouthed a silent thank you, and she grinned back, her heart full. For the first time, she didn't need her father's penthouse or his name to feel like she belonged. She just needed this. Daniel's quiet strength, Ava's laughter, the rhythm of their small, shared world. That evening, as they packed up the truck, a letter arrived at the duplex, delivered by courier. Sophie recognized the crisp, embossed envelope her father's stationery. Her fingers hesitated, then tore it open. Edward Langley's handwriting was precise, each word deliberate. Asterisk, I won't pretend to understand your choice, but I respect it. You found something I never could. Be well. Asterisk, no apology, no grand gesture, but it was enough. Edward wasn't a man who bent easily, but this was a crack in his armor, a nod to the daughter he'd lost to her own courage. Sophie folded the letter, tucking it into her pocket, next to the sapphire necklace she no longer hid. She didn't need it anymore, not as a tether to her past, but as a reminder of what she'd walked away from and what she'd gained. This story of Daniel, Sophie, and Ava isn't just a tale of chance encounters or dramatic escapes. It's a testament to the quiet power of kindness, the strength of chosen family, and the courage to build a life on your own terms. Daniel, a single father scraping by in a city that often forgot people like him, didn't have money or status to offer. Yet, with a couch, a mug of warm water, and a heart full of self-respect, he gave Sophie something her father's billions never could, a place to belong. Sophie, in turn, found freedom not in running, but in choosing Daniel, Ava, and the life where love outweighed fear. In 2025, as Cleveland grapples with rising rents, job scarcity, and the weight of a divided society, their story resonates. It reminds us that the best lives aren't built with wealth, but with honesty, resilience, and the small acts that stitch people together. Daniel's willingness to help a stranger, Ava's unfiltered trust, and Sophie's defiance of a gilded cage show us that home isn't a place, it's a feeling crafted by those who show up, day after day, for each other. The world can feel heavy, with headlines of economic strain and social media's relentless noise. But stories like this cut through, offering a truth as old as time. Kindness endures, love transforms, and courage reshapes destinies. Daniel and Sophie didn't just find each other. They built something new, proving that even in a city of broken streetlights and unpaid bills, there's room for hope. If this story moved you, we invite you to join the Legacy Stories community. Click like, subscribe, and hit the bell to never miss a tale of human connection and resilience. More stories are coming, each one a reminder that the heart's choices can light even the darkest paths. Thank you for being here.